Just wanted to start by saying, hey, it's always good to be back at Ridgecrest. Anything that we got going on, everything good? Okay, cool. I wanted to share a quick story with you as we get started this morning about what happened to me on Father's Day. My wife said, what do you want? And I know that I'm getting old and boring by the things that I suggest that I want. I said I wanted a pen. Just a typical writing pen. So my wife said, that's weird. She got me a pen, though, and I was happy. Now, it came to me pretty quick, and I was pretty happy with this pen that I had gotten. It's not this one, but I actually have a pen just to kind of further drive home the illustration. But almost right away, I noticed that it wasn't exactly working the way that I intended for it to work. It was skipping and, it wasn't doing the things that I wanted it to do. So I did what naturally anyone would do in my situation. I got on ChatGPT and I said, what's going on right now with my pen? I figured out what was wrong, and so I started to take it apart. I started to just completely deconstruct this pen in my office, and within seconds I had this pen fully deconstructed in my office. And it turns out that as I started to look at it, I started to understand more about what was going on. I needed a new part. And so I found the part that I was looking for. It cost me a whole $10. And within a few days, UPS showed up at my home, and they had a package. Now, typically, you sign for the package, and away you go. Well, for whatever reason, the UPS guy said, "Hey, here's the deal: is the website that you purchased this pen from, they didn't charge you shipping." And I was like, "Fantastic! I got a good deal." And they said, no, they should have charged you shipping. And it came from Germany. I didn't realize that either when I was ordering this part. I was like, okay, cool. What are we talking, $5, $6? And he goes, $30. I did not expect that number. So for my $10 part now, I'm $40 in. I sat there and I debated, do I take this package? Do I just let it go? Because this is not exactly what I signed up for. This isn't the package that I expected for it to be. But it's special to me. My wife, got me this pen, and I wanted to use this pen. It was my Father's Day present, right? And so reluctantly, begrudgingly, I signed the paperwork, and they gave me the package. So I ran upstairs, grabbed it, from my office, ran upstairs with all of these deconstructed pieces, and I started to reconstruct and, put it back together and put the ink thing in there, and wouldn't you know, it works perfectly now. So, that's got a good story. It's got a good ending to that story. But it reminded me about a topic that has just been heavy on my mind for whatever reason as of late, and that's the topic of deconstruction. I've heard that word pop up a lot lately. I don't know if you've heard that word pop up in your world as of late. And usually, like when I think about deconstruction, it's very much in the same vein of my pen story. It's, you take something apart, and then you have the intention of putting it back together again. But here's the thing that makes me concerned is I've started to hear that a lot in regards to faith, this word deconstruction. The first time I actually heard it was about a year ago. It was from a friend of mine. He used it to describe his faith. And I can't tell you everything about the whole conversation that we had because we're still in the middle of some pretty deep conversations about it. And there's a lot of trust and equity that's been built up as a result of those discussions. But I do want to still discuss the topic. Hearing him use that word deconstruction was the first time in the whole thing for me that I really started to understand that this whole concept of deconstruction is not something that you just hear about on television. You don't just hear about it from celebrities and musicians, which I've heard that from them now as of since. But I figured, I wanted to share that with you today. As you guys, or as most of you know, I grew up here. I've been a Christian my whole life. So when my friend said to me, this word, deconstruction, my guard went up immediately. And basically what he was saying to me is, I'm lost in my faith, and I'm trying to, it's deconstructed. And I was like, okay, Great, let's reconstruct it, But what I've started to find is when people use that terminology, a lot of times what they're saying is, I don't have any intention of wanting to put together the pieces again of my faith. Which gets me to a point where I feel defensive, I'm not always looking for a fight, but I don't run from one either, and it makes me want to confront him. I wanted to argue. I wanted to just fix it right there. One conversation, we're going to figure this all out. We're going to go along our way, and we're going to be happy, and we'll just pretend like this never happened. We'll pull out some verses, we'll make the case, and I'm going to win him back right now. I had to learn pretty quickly that that's just not always the case. I had to kind of fight a lot of my instincts as I went along this road with him. Now, I don't think it was wrong. My intention was wrong. It wasn't wrong because faith doesn't matter. It certainly does. It matters more than anything because that wasn't what the moment needed. That's the point that I'm trying to make today, is that's not what the moment needed. The moment didn't need a debate. It didn't need me to say, let me tell you why you're wrong and I'm right. It needed me to stay in the room. It needed me to continue to be his friend. And that's kind of what I wanted to share with you today, because if you're anything like me, when somebody uses a word, like this with you, your first instinct is probably also going to want to be to defend the faith, to have an argument, to prove why it's right. And I want to at least tell you about some of the challenges that we've had to overcome. Here's what I figured out since then. As I look around this room today, most of you are not going to be challenged or are going to deconstruct yourself. You're not going to deconstruct your faith, so I'm not too worried as I look at this room. You've been walking with Jesus for a long time, and my guess is that you will continue to walk with Jesus for a long time more. But the reason I wanted to bring this up is I bet almost every single one of you either already has or one day will have somebody that you love use the word deconstruction. Maybe it's a son, maybe it's a daughter, maybe it's a grandchild, I don't know. Maybe it's a friend from work. And when that happens, you have an opportunity. When that happens, what you do in that conversation could matter more than you potentially think that it might. So today isn't really a class about deconstruction. No, it's a class about how to love someone who's going through deconstruction. So let me go ahead and take a step back, and let's talk about this word, deconstruction, and what it actually means. Because part of what makes it tricky is that it doesn't just mean one thing, right? The word itself, originally, it came from philosophy. It came from architecture. And in those settings, deconstruction meant something like I actually just described, taking something apart so you can examine it and you can put it back together. I used to have this little weird thing as a kid where I'd just take all of my toys apart and try to want to put it back together. And sometimes it came back together the way it should, and sometimes not as much. But I wanted to pull it apart. I wanted to see how it worked, figure out what's going on behind the scenes, and then rebuild it. And that, I think, is the original idea behind deconstruction. And honestly, that version of deconstruction, that's not necessarily unbiblical when we point it up towards the Bible. Scripture is full of people who took their faith apart and they wrestled with it. Job spent 30-something chapters demanding answers from God, right? The Psalms are full of people yelling at heaven. Habakkuk, he opens his book saying, "How long, Lord, must I call for help, and you do not listen?" Even Jesus on the cross quotes Psalm chapter 22 when he says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" You see, the Bible isn't afraid of hard questions. The Bible contains hard questions. But here's where the word deconstruction has started to shift as of late. When most people use deconstruction today, especially online and some of the outlets that we have from social networking, the stories you hear about, they don't usually mean they're taking it apart with the intention to rebuild. They mean they're taking it apart and they're going to walk away. The reconstruction part of it rarely happens. The deconstruction certainly happens, but the reconstruction rarely does. And when they're done, a lot of times they don't come out the other side with a sturdier faith. They come out the other side without a faith at all. So in that moment, we caught two different things that we can, that's going by the same name right now. These people are wrestling. They're wrestling with Scripture and how Scripture actually invites it in. If you look at Scripture, there's lots of honest questions. There's lots of struggle that we see. There's lots of sitting with God through hard moments. And I think that it's important to remind them that God's going to meet you in that struggle. And then there's the version that's mostly just a slow exit. And the hard part is from the outside, especially like in the early stages, they can look pretty similar to one another. So when somebody you love starts asking hard questions about their faith, I think we have a job to play. And maybe it's a job that's different than what you think. I think our job is not to panic. It's not to assume the worst and they're going to walk away. I don't think that it's inconvenient or shouldn't be inconvenient to answer a hard question. Some of the most faithful people in the Bible asked the hardest questions. I think our job is to figure out whether they're wrestling towards something or if they're wrestling away from it. And I think additionally, our job is to be the kind of person that they can wrestle with instead of against. Most people who deconstruct don't do it because questions got too difficult. They do it because they ran out of people that were willing to sit with them in the questions. I wanted to look at a story from the Bible. If you have your Bibles, we're actually going to be in Genesis, not only right now, but as we get into our actual worship time as well. I'm keeping my eyes on the clock. We end at, 9:55? Somewhere in there? Okay, ish. And 9:45, okay. We'll quit at some point. We'll see how we go. By the way, this is a class, so if you have any thoughts or want to yell at me, feel free to. But I wanted to look at the story of Jacob. I want you, tell me what speaking of, you can talk. Tell me what we know about Jacob. I'm going to get me a sip of coffee. Tell me what we know about Jacob. Lively crowd we have here.
Question is, what do we know about Jacob?
Yep. What do we know about Jacob? Son of Abraham? Okay. What else we got? 12 brothers. Okay. Yeah. What else we got? Twin. Okay. Tell me about his twin brother. Okay. 12 brothers, by the way, I believe that was Joseph, right? Yeah. We're going to be talking about Joseph a little bit later on, but yes. So he has a brother. His brother's name is Esau. You know what? In fact, let me just tell you the whole story. Jacob is this guy whose whole life has been about scheming. His whole life has been about running. And in fact, he's got this brother, Esau. The only really differentiator between him and Esau is Esau's a hairy guy. So if you're a hairy guy, shout out to you. And so here's what happens is Jacob deceives his father, who is starting to become blind, and he can't tell the difference. He portrays himself as a very hairy guy as well, pretends as if he is Esau, steals his birthright. Not cool. And turns out Esau doesn't like that a whole lot. Who knew? And Esau is scheming to, okay, I'm going to get this guy back. I'm going to, he stole my birthright. I'm going to steal his life. So Jacob runs, right? He takes off. He runs from home, and he spends 20 years working for his father-in-law. And his father-in-law also tricked him as much as he tricked everybody else. And now finally, he's come to the realization that there's no place like home. I need to go back home. But that has an implication. It means that he's about to see his brother Esau for the first time in 20 years. The brother that he wronged, the brother who last time Jacob heard wanted to kill him. And Jacob is terrified, and he sends gifts ahead to try to, for lack of better words, to soften him up. And he divides his family into groups so that if one gets attacked, the other might survive. And then this happens. So let's go ahead and pick up this story in Genesis chapter 32. We're going to pick up in verses 22 through 30. Genesis 32, verse 22 through 30. Here's what it says. It says, the same night that he arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok, he took them and sent them across the stream, and everything else that he had. And Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket. And Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with them. Then he said, let me go, for the day has broken. But Jacob, pay attention to this, but Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And he said to them, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. Then he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God, with men, and you've prevailed. Then Jacob asked him, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, for I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered. There's a lot going on in this passage. But I wanted to pull out a few things that's going to help us back with this whole idea of deconstruction and what we're talking about today. First of all, Jacob in this moment in his life, he's alone. He's alone in the dark at the end of himself. And a lot of times as we start to look at this concept of deconstruction, that's where wrestling starts. He's not in a temple surrounded by friends, family. He's not in a worship service. He sent everybody that he loves across the river. I want to pay attention to that river that he sent him across. And now he's by himself in the night, terrified about what's coming. Maybe that's Esau that's waiting for me. And here's where God meets him. And I want you to hear this, that almost always, that's often how deconstruction presents itself as well. Not when somebody's life is going great and going perfect. No, it's usually when they're alone in the dark with questions that they don't know what to do with. If the person that you love right now, maybe you're hearing this lesson and thinking of somebody that's on your mind, that's not a place that God avoids. And I need to start by telling you that. That's a place that oftentimes God shows up. Secondly, this is interesting, is we immediately go to a wrestling match. This isn't a conversation, it's a full-on wrestling match that's going on with Jacob. Jacob doesn't ask polite theological questions. No, he fights. And he fights all night. And here's something that's kind of interesting that as we go through this is, in this moment, first of all, it says that he fought a man. Who do we think he's fighting here? I mean, he's asking for a blessing at the end, so I think that we can surmise something bigger is happening here. God? Anybody have a different thought?
The Bible says God, but I always kind of thought it was an angel.
Yeah. I sure wish sometimes, say that again?
Someone sent from God.
Yep. So we could probably surmise, if he's asking for a blessing, that it is God or somebody sent from God, potentially, something heavenly. Yes. But here's the thing: is God isn't afraid of being wrestled with. I think we can all say that as well, because right here in this moment, Jacob is literally wrestling with someone sent from God or God himself. He's not insulted by it. He's not above it. He gets down in the dirt and he's going to wrestle a man. And he wrestles him until daybreak, which means when somebody that you love is wrestling hard with God, I don't think that we have to be afraid of that either. God wasn't. We should encourage them to keep fighting. The third thing that comes out of this is, does Jacob come out of this fight unscathed? What happens? He comes away with a limp, right? His hip is put out of joint. He walks differently for the rest of his life. And I think that's important to note, because we should also note that wrestling honestly with God, it's not safe. People who do it a lot of times are going to come out changed. This is probably, of this whole lesson, this is the part that has resonated more so with me as of late, is because, as I start to reach for my friends and I want to help them through this moment in their life, in my selfish mind, I want them to be who they were. But when you're wrestling with God, you're going to come out changed. You're not who you were. You're going to come out different. I also think it's important to know that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a bad thing. It doesn't mean that the wrestling failed, does it? No, I would actually probably argue the opposite. The limp that we see with Jacob is evidence that the wrestling was real. The wrestling worked. So the person that you love, if they come back from whatever this season of life is that they're going through, and I pray that they do, I pray that my friend does, they might not come back the same, though. And I should tell you that ahead of time, and we should be okay with that. They might come back with a limp. They might come back with a different kind of faith than they had before. But know this, a limping faith is still faith. We shouldn't measure their return by what they looked like before or whether they look exactly like they did before, but measure it by whether they're still walking, even if it's with a limp. The fourth thing, as we start to examine this passage, is Jacob refuses to let go. He says in no uncertain terms, I will not bless you I will not let you go unless you bless me. That's the line. I'm just going to not let go. The difference between deconstruction that ends in deeper faith and deconstruction that ends in walking away is this a person going to let go? Jacob says, I'm not. As a result, Jacob becomes wounded. Jacob becomes exhausted. The sun comes up, and he says, I'm not leaving this. I'm not leaving this until you meet me, until you bless me. I need to say again that the danger of deconstruction isn't the wrestling. Wrestling's in the Bible. The danger is letting go before the blessing comes. And here's something interesting is about the people in this room. Who's in this wrestling match with Jacob? Tell me about the people that are around. I already touched on it for a second. If you're racking your brain to think about who else was around, don't rack it too hard, because there was nobody around. It was just Jacob and God, or an angel sent by God. His family, where did we say they were? I told you to remember this. Where was his family at? They're not here. There's a body of water. We call it a sea. close. It was a river. It was a river. His family was across the river. The text is pretty clear in that, and we can go back to that, but just go back, look at Genesis chapter 32, verses 22 through 27. I think I made a little note of it. But anyways, he sent everybody that he loved across, and here he is, left by himself in the dark. And I think that we should understand that sometimes that's just how it has to be when our friends and when our loved ones are going through deconstruction. Wrestling itself is between a person and God. Now, what does that mean my part is in it? If I know that my friend is in it and he's wrestling with God, do I just stay across the sea? What's the point for me in this story? I mean, because nobody else can get in the ring, right? You can't wrestle for your loved ones. You can't ask some of the same questions that your loved ones might be asking. You can't go through their crisis for them. I think that part's theirs. But what can you do? Well, you can be on the other side of the river when they come back. You can be the first to, when you see their face, when you see them coming limping out of the dark, to put your arm around their shoulder. And you can refuse to give up on them while the wrestling is happening. Most deconstruction stories I hear they end with somebody walking away from the river and walking away alone. And nobody waiting on the other side. I don't want you to be not present. I don't think that's great English. I don't want you to be not present in your person's story. That's the point I want you to take away from that. I want you to be present. Because when you're not, that's not as fun of a story to tell. Because as I start to examine this story, we look at Jacob. Jacob gets his blessing, does he not? Jacob's name changes to Israel, right? He gets that blessing. He's limping, but he is coming out the other side, and he still has his faith. I want to contrast that. How many of you guys knew the name Jacob before we started today? This is where we interact, because it's going to look really weird if I see no hands up. Okay, almost everybody knew of Jacob's story, or at least knew something about Jacob, yes? Okay, straw poll. How many of you guys have heard the name Demas? D-E-M-A-S, Demas. I see very much fewer hands. What's that?
I'm sure I've read it several times.
Sure, we might have read it several times? Maybe so. We don't know that name quite as well, do we? I would love to just end the lesson right here and be like, we should all just be Jacob, and there are no bad stories like this. Well, I want to round out the story with Demas. If I told you every story ended up with, reconstruction of a deconstructed faith, that is the hope, that is the anticipation, that is the desire. But for every Jacob, we also have a Demas. I wanted to look at his story. I want to introduce you to him. You've probably never heard a sermon about him because, well, there's not a whole lot to preach about Demas. He shows up in exactly 3 verses in the whole New Testament. I wanted to read you the last one. It's in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 10. Now, Paul, we talked about him, I believe, last time I was here. He starts writing from prison near the end of his life. This is in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 10, and this is what he says. For Demas, in love with the present world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica. That's it. That's the whole story. That's all of it. Now we see 2 other times that Demas shows up. Paul lists him as a co-worker, a fellow laborer in the gospel. He's actually mentioned with some of the biggest. How many of you guys know the name Luke? You guys know the name Luke? Okay, if you don't, it's right between Mark and John. If you just kind of look right sandwiched in the middle, you might see his name a few times. Demas is actually mentioned right alongside Luke. The guy who wrote, I mentioned last time that if you don't know who wrote a book of the New Testament, that you could take a guess at Paul, you'd probably be right. Well, if you guess Luke, you're also probably on track to be right. Luke wrote a quarter of the New Testaments, and here's Demas right here walking hand in hand with him. Demas was in that circle. He was a friend of all the bigs. He was on the inside. He was trusted. But then Paul writes this letter from prison, and we see that Demas isn't there anymore. He's gone. He's in Thessalonica. He's in love, according to the passages here. He is in love with the present world. That's in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 10. We don't get the same arc that we got with Jacob. We don't get to see him wrestle. We just see he's gone. We just see this empty seat. And I'm not telling you that to scare you. I tell you this because part of loving somebody well is being honest that not every story ends well. I want it to, but it doesn't. Some people let go of the rope. Some people decide that having a deconstructed faith is just fine. And when that happens, and unfortunately it does happen, it's not because you didn't love them. It's not because you didn't pray hard enough. It's not because you didn't say the right things. Sometimes people just choose to leave. But I want you to hold on to this. Demas had Paul. Demas had Luke. He had this community of people who almost certainly grieved for him. I mean, enough so that they're talking about him in 2 Timothy verse 4. And I have to believe that mattered. I have to believe that the people who stayed for Demas, even when he walked away, that their staying matters to God. Even if it didn't change Demas's mind, it matters. I think our job is to be on the other side of the river. I think our job is to be available. The outcome is out of our control. Our friend could be a Jacob. Our friend could be a Demas. But our job is to be on the other side of the river. Our job is to be present. Okay. So let me tell you about some signs. Signs of someone that's deconstructing. I want to get practical for just a few minutes. Like I said before, I don't think that most of the people in this room are going to deconstruct, but you play a pivotal role in the lives of your loved ones, of your friends. You're going to potentially be standing next to somebody who does. What should you watch for? What do you do when you see those signs? I want to give you 3 signs. There's more than 3, but we don't have time. But these are the 3 that I put at the top of the list, and one of them I'm just putting straight to the top because it is the one that brought me to this topic in the first place, is that they start lumping all Christians together. They start just lumping them all together. This is the one that I noticed in my friend, and I'd probably put it near the top because it's evident early. It starts with something like this, a hurt, a frustration, something that they actually saw a Christian do or say that was wrong. But then it starts to expand from there, from instead of, well, that Christian was a hypocrite, to Christians are hypocrites. Not that Christian was a hypocrite, just Christians in general are hypocrites. Instead of saying, that church over there wounded me, it becomes, the church is broken. They start thinking about the worst examples of Christianity becoming the definition of Christianity in their mind. And once that lumping starts to happen, walking away gets a lot easier. Because in their head, they're not walking away from Jesus anymore. No, they're walking away from a category of people they've decided that they don't want to be associated with. They've built themselves an exit. Now, I want to tell you this, is when you hear that kind of generalization start to creep in, that's a moment to lean into, not a moment to say, okay, well, that's the lost cause. I'm going to head for the exits now because we sure tried. Don't pull back. Don't argue with them. Talk to them. Ask them what happened. Ask them, where they experienced these hurts, what they saw. Because almost always what you're going to get to is underneath there's a generalization. There's a specific story that they're thinking of, and they haven't processed yet. I got my friend to this point where, I started to ask questions. I started to say, tell me about this. I want to hear about this. I was like, have you seen that present in the Ridgecrest Church of Christ? No. Okay. Well, so then why are we saying Christians in general, right? Why don't we say this specific incident didn't go the way I wanted it to go? Now he's struggling with that. Now he's wrestling again. Good. We want him to be wrestling. Sign 2, they start pulling back from community. And this one starts to become the most visible, and it's the easiest to mistake for something else. They stop coming to church. Maybe they get quiet in small groups or even in a classroom setting like this. The excuses start to pile up. Well, I can't make it today because work's too busy. They got me too busy at work. The kids have something going on. I can't make it today because kids have something. I've just been tired. It's a tough time of year. I'm tired. Any one of those, when you just think of the one singular excuse, that's not really that big of a deal, right? But when you start taking all of them collectively together over months, that nothing becomes something. Yeah? The questions can start to pile up. And if there's nobody there to ask, if there's no community there to ask, the doubts start to come in and there's nobody to sit with. And after a while, if you don't make yourself present in their community, those questions start to go away. And the fire just goes out. So if you start to see somebody pulling back from community, I want to encourage you not to let them disappear politely. No, keep showing up. Keep texting, keep inviting. You don't even have to make a big deal about it, but you have to make sure that when you see somebody pulling away from you specifically, we need to go to them. We need to do it actively, not passively, like I sure hope that they show up next Sunday. We need to actually pursue them with fervor. The sign three is when hard questions are not getting engaged. This is the one that I think just as a church family, we have to be pretty honest about. If somebody that you love asks a hard question about faith, our job is not to have the perfect answer. Our job is not to have the perfect faith. Our job is to take the question seriously, to say, that's a good question. If you don't have the answer, saying, let me think about it and get back to you, is a perfectly acceptable answer. But get back to them. Or, even better, say, let's look at it together. Let's pull out our Bibles and look at it together. Don't panic. Don't give the Sunday school version, or don't say, let me go ahead and refer you to somebody else. I think that's fine too, but I think you need to be present. And certainly don't change the subject. If they ask you a hard question, a hard theological question, do not say, how about that Thunder team, huh? No, that's not the question they're asking you. They're asking you a deep question, and you should give it the time and attention that it deserves. Honor the question. I'll tell you this, the fastest way to push somebody further into deconstruction is to make them feel like their questions are dangerous or stupid or something that they shouldn't be asking. The fastest way to keep them in the wrestling and to keep wrestling is to be somebody who is not afraid of a question. Okay, so what should we do? I know we're starting to get close on time. 1, first of all, we should stay in the relationship. No matter what they say, no matter how much it scares you, no matter how wrong you think that they're getting it, do not be the person that walks away first. Continue to be present. Number 2, ask questions more than you answer. We are not their apologist. I'm going to say that again. We are not their apologist. We are their friend. Most of the time, when somebody is wrestling, what they need is somebody that's going to ask them what they're actually feeling. Not somebody who's going to hand them a 5-point argument and say, God didn't argue, and just try to continue to argue and beat them over the head with it. They don't want that, right? When we start to look at this passage of Jacob, I don't see that in God's response. He doesn't say, let me tell you, point 1, why that question is a dumb question. Point 2, no, what happens? God didn't argue Jacob into faith. He showed up. God continues to wrestle with him. And that's something I think that we can also do. All right, number 3, pray for them. This one's the most important. If you don't hear point 1 or 2, or even if you disagree with 1 or 2, I think this is one that we can agree on. Pray for them. Pray for them and let them know you do. And don't do it in a way that makes it feel like pressure. Don't do it in a way that makes it feel like you're looking down to them. Do it in a way that lets them know that they're still a part of your family. They're still a part of a people who love them, whether they believe it right now or not. You can't wrestle for them, but you can be there when the wrestling is done. I also think that we should acknowledge it with them. Tell them, hey, you're wrestling right now. Keep wrestling. And say it in no uncertain terms. I want to come back to my friend for a second as we wrap up things. He's still in the conversation. We're still in deep study together. He's not where he was a year ago, which makes me happy. But he's not where I want him to be either, which makes me kind of sad. But he's somewhere in the middle. And this is the thing that I personally am fighting myself on, because I want him to be that version of him that I looked up to when I was a kid. I want him to be that thing that I was like, man, I aspire to be like you. And well, he's different. He's changed a little bit. But that's my own thing. That's not his thing. His thing is he's still wrestling. And that's something that I continue to say is continue to keep on wrestling, keep on wrestling. And man, if you come away with a limp and you don't look the same, and if I have to put my arm around you and we get through that finish line together, we got through it. And when we walk with a limp at the gates of heaven, that limp don't hurt anymore. I think that's something we need to take with us. The only reason that I'm able to be in those conversations with my friend is because I don't argue with him. I don't panic. I argue with him. Let me rephrase. I do argue with him when the time calls for. But I don't do it with selfish desires in mind. I don't try to win him back in a single conversation. It's going to take longer than that. But I do stay. I do keep on showing up. I do keep on asking questions that challenges his narratives of deconstruction. I keep loving him the same way that I loved him before he ever used the word deconstruction. And so here's what I want you to take with you today. When somebody that you love uses this word, if you haven't heard it, you might hear it soon. What you're hearing is often a last gasp. By the time that the word comes out of their mouth, they've usually been wrestling pretty quietly for a long time with this concept. Maybe that has taken place over months or years. The verbalization, though, hear this. The verbalization of the word deconstruction is not the beginning. It's not the beginning. If you hear that word come out, it's usually pretty late in the process. And we have a very narrow window where a million things can go wrong and only maybe 1 or 2 can steer them back toward Jesus. I want to encourage you not to be one of the million things that could go wrong. You don't have to have the perfect answer. You don't have to win an argument. You don't have to fix it in one conversation. But you do need to be the person that stays. Be faithful. Be present. Refuse to walk away. And they're going to challenge you. They're going to ask you those tough questions, and they're going to make you want to walk away. Don't do it. Be the same person that you've always been. That's my lesson for today. That's just been on my heart as of late, as I've been thinking about deconstruction a lot. I've been thinking about my friend quite a bit. And I wanted to present this opportunity to you as we start to think about our loved ones, and if we start to hear the same things creeping up. Let's say a prayer, and we will have our worship session shortly. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this day. I thank you for the blessings that you allow for us. I thank you for us allowing us to have these tough conversations, that we get to have these moments with our loved ones, that we get to struggle with our loved ones. Father, I pray that when we have moments like this, when we have these opportunities that you place in front of us, Father, I pray that we don't run away, that we don't put on a mask, that we not shy away from an opportunity to get to steer someone back towards you. Father, I pray that we lean in, that we have the courage, even when we are scared. I pray that we have the courage to stand up and have a very real, honest conversation with them. Father, I pray for those families, those friends, those loved ones that are in our lives that are in a moment of deconstruction in their life. Father, I just pray that you intervene, that you help them to start to reconstruct where deconstruction has happened. Father, I thank you for allowing us to give us examples like that of Jacob and that of Demas, that we can see the positives and the negatives of what deconstruction can lead to. And Father, I just pray that we continue to lean into our friends and make them a Jacob story and not a Demas story. Knowing, Father, that there's times where we might not have ultimate control over any of that. But Father, I do pray that we continue to be present and that your hand point them back towards who they are to become. Father, I thank you for sending your son Jesus, for him giving a life, an example that makes us one that we can continue to strive to be. I thank you for him giving his life on the cross for our sins. In Yeshua's name we pray. Amen. Thank you. You're dismissed. Well, it is good to be back at Ridgecrest. I have a heart for Ridgecrest. I hope you know that. If you don't know me, I've gotten to spend a lot of my time at Ridgecrest. I grew up here. I think I started when I was 13 years old, and I started thinking about what I was like as a 13-year-old, and more so as I started to age up, and how things change, in your life. And I actually have a story today about a 17-year-old. And I started thinking about, what was I like in 17 years old? And most likely I was probably sitting right here in this pew on most Sunday mornings. And I sure am glad that we reupholstered all the pews, because I'm almost certain that I might have carved my name in along with another one by the initials of CN. I won't say who it is. I won't out him, but he was a friend of mine, and maybe his father's here today. I don't know. But we had some fun, and I sure am glad that we've gotten to, put that behind us. But I will say, it's been just a pleasure to get to grow up here, to get to, at 17 years old, I think about what I was like. I was doing that kind of madness, and I was trying to make a certain young blonde-haired girl love me, and it wasn't working so well, probably because I was carving my name in the back of a pew. Anyways, but then I start to think about, I think about some of my youth group that I had here, and, seeing them as teenagers. And, this guy right over here, Austin, he was about this tall at about 17 years old, and now he dwarfs. I make him look like a dwarf, or he makes me look like a dwarf. It's crazy. So good to be back home. Always good to be back home. I did want to share with you, we talked, if you weren't here for class this morning, we talked about Jacob and we talked about the story of Jacob and Esau. We're going to keep it in the family today. We're going to talk about Jacob's son, Joseph, today. I also wanted to point out that, I had an opportunity recently, speaking of teenagers, I got an opportunity recently to go back out to Lariat Creek and got to speak to their young men and young women. And I played a little game, and I wanted to just kind of tell you about how that went. First of all, I thought about playing it here. I'm not, because, you'll understand why soon. What we did was I picked one of the kids, and I was like, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to blindfold you. And somewhere in the crowd, I'm going to put your youth minister. I'm just going to sit them down. We're going to spin you a few times, and then I'm going to ask you to go find your youth minister. Now, nobody else was allowed to talk, and so my whole point was I'm going to try to disorient this kid and let him walk. Well, what do you think happened? He didn't even get close. I put him right in the middle, the youth minister right in the middle, and this kid, I don't know where he was going. I want to say he was going to a mountain somewhere. We thought about, just let him walk to the street, but we stopped him before that. But I put exactly 1 minute on the clock to see if he's going to be able to accomplish this task. Needless to say, it did not go the way that he thought that it might. So I was like, okay, let's run this back. Let's try this again. I'm going to blindfold you again. I'm going to give you the same 2 or 3 spins. I'm going to disorient you. I'm going to do what we can. But I want to do something slightly different this time. This time, I want to take your one of your trusted friends, one of your confidants, and I want to have him sit next to you. And you're still blind. I still haven't moved your youth minister, but you never saw where he was in the first place. I'm going to put, I gave you a minute last time. I'm going to give you a minute and a half this time to find your youth minister. I'm going to be a little bit kinder to you this time. The other thing is nobody else could still talk, just like last time. The only thing that changed was your confidant can give you instruction on where your youth minister might be. And what do you think happened? He found him. What was interesting to me is I never know how this is going to go, but it went better than I ever could have expected to go, because I gave him an extra 30 seconds. He found his youth minister in 48 seconds. So he found him out in the original intended time, despite, having the exact same conditions. The only thing that changed was that one person. And I point that out because here's the thing, all of us spend parts of our lives feeling like this kid that had been disoriented, that had been blindfolded, felt. The way that maybe he looked in that first round. He was blindfolded, he was disoriented, he wasn't exactly sure of what his conditions were like. Wasn't sure of which way was forward, which way was backward. And maybe some of us right now, we find ourselves in a season that's kind of like that right now. And maybe, perhaps the people around you don't even know it. So tonight I wanted to tell you about a kid who got dropped into that feeling harder than just about anybody in the Bible. His name was Joseph. And he was about 17 when his story starts. And I think about 17 years old, that's the current age of my daughter, which is crazy. But I think about, that's where this kid's story begins. Joseph was the second youngest of 12 brothers. And his dad, for lack of better words, he played favorites. And Joseph was definitely his dad's favorite. And everybody knew it, including his brothers, and you can imagine that went over just great. It did not. But basically what his dad did, and you probably already know this story, his dad created this wonderful, fancy coat for him that basically said, "This one is my favorite son." Every time Joseph walked into the room, that coat was a proclamation of, "This is my favorite son." Now, you can imagine that his brothers didn't take too kindly to that. And it got worse because Joseph, on top of all of this, he started to have these elaborate dreams where his whole family was bowing down to him. And he told them about the dreams. His brothers did not love that. Who knew? So one day, his dad sends Joseph, and he sends him out to check on his brothers who are way out in the fields. And Joseph goes out there because, he's a good son, right? And his brothers see him coming from a long way off, and they decide, I've had enough. I've had enough. Collectively, they decided they had enough. There's a few that were like, I don't know if we should kill him just quite yet. But ultimately, they decided they wanted to make Joseph pay for being the favorite. To make Joseph pay for telling him, you're going to bow down to me. So I'm going to actually, I want to read to you what happens next. Because I know this already kind of sounds bad, but it's even worse when I summarize it. So I'm going to give you the whole breakdown, the whole shenanigans of it all. In Genesis chapter 37, verse 23, listen to how casual the brothers are about what they're going to do. Starting in verse 23, it says this. It says, so when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors. You remember that coat of many colors is gone now. And they took him and they threw him into a pit. I think it's funny that we also say the pit was empty. There was no water in it. So, just kind of giving the full landscape, just an empty pit somewhere. Good brothers, right? No, not so much. Here's what's interesting to me is the author puts this last part in here. It says, then they sat down to eat. Maybe they just felt like they needed to get some Chick-fil-A or something. I don't know exactly what was going on here. But it says, then they sat down to eat. Their brother, keep in mind, they've just thrown into a pit. And they said, feels like a good time for some lunch. And it continues on. It says, looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh. And they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, what do we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. So, they kind of back off of this whole killing idea. Instead, they're going to sell him and not lay a hand on him. After all, he is our brother, right? That's okay. We can throw him into a pit. It doesn't have anything in there, no water, no nothing. We won't kill him. Because he's our brother, we love him. Let's just sell him into slavery instead. Let's not lay a hand on him. After all, he is our brother. He's our own flesh. And it says his brothers agreed. When the Midianite traders passed by, his brothers pulled Joseph out of the pit and sold him for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took Joseph to Egypt. Now picture this. You're 17 years old. Your hands are tied. You're being pulled out of a pit that the brothers that you love have just thrown you into. And for 1 second, you're probably thinking, my brothers are playing a cruel trick on me. I get it. Brotherly love. Get me on out of here. You're being rescued. And then you realize what's really happening. They're handing you off to strangers. You are about to head to a foreign country, hundreds of miles from your dad, and it only costs 20 pieces of silver for all of this to happen. Joseph was about to walk into the unknown. So from here in the story, Joseph gets dragged from there to Egypt, from this pit to Egypt. So now he's in a different country. He's learning a different language. There's different gods that are existing right now, different food. I actually got an opportunity to feel kind of what this was like. A few weeks ago, my wife, my kids, we all went to Africa. And it was quite the culture shock to be all of a sudden from, what we know to be true here in America, to be ripped out of that, and now you're in a different country. You're hearing a different language. They're doing things with their, as far as their language go, that I can't even fathom. There's truly, I'm not making this up, there was clicks. Like, when they would sing a song, there was a little click at the end. I couldn't even do that. Different food. Did not know some of the cultures of, they had salsa. And there wasn't many people that we knew either, except for the people that we were with. So I can kind of relate to how Joseph must have felt in this. We felt like a fish out of water. And then, on top of that, he gets sold another time. Once he gets to Egypt, he gets sold another time as a household slave to an Egyptian by the name of Potiphar. And now the writer of Genesis does something interesting. I don't want you to miss this. Listen to how chapter 39 starts with just these two verses. This is what it says. It says, "Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt." This is chapter 39, verse 1 and 2. I didn't put it up on the screen, but you guys have Bibles, so please read it. It says this, "Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. An Egyptian named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guard, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph." I'm going to say that again. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. The Lord was with Joseph. I want you to remember that phrase. If I'm a note taker, if you're a note taker, I want to encourage you to just write that down. The Lord was with Joseph. Tuck it away, because we're going to actually come back to this. So Joseph is in this moment, and what does he do? Well, he just does his job. He works hard. He stays faithful. And here's what happens is then Potiphar starts to notice all of this. He starts to understand that something's going on here. There we go. Lord was with Joseph. Now I got that part. The Lord was with Joseph. So Joseph does his job. He works hard. He's faithful. And Potiphar starts to take notice. And Joseph ends up running his entire household. And things are looking about as good as they can look when you're still a slave. Not too shabby. And then they lived happily ever after. Right? I wish. Wrong. It gets worse again. Potiphar's wife, I think we might have some kids still in here, so I'm going to keep it PG. Potiphar's wife decides she's interested in Joseph in a romantic kind of way and starts pressuring Joseph to be interested in her too. But Joseph does what he should do. Joseph does the right thing. He says no. He says no repeatedly, time and time again. And he tries to stay away from her. Why? Because this woman is a wife. She is Potiphar's wife. And one day, she grabs him. And he runs. Because he's still trying to remain faithful. He's still trying to remain true to Potiphar. This is Potiphar's wife. This is something that is not for me. This is for Potiphar. So he runs. He takes off. And his wife grabs him and takes the coat that he has and manages to have his coat, or at least a piece of his coat, left behind. And then she uses and manipulates this situation that has transpired. She tells her husband that Joseph attacked her. And Potiphar throws Joseph in prison like a good husband should do, right? If you got attacked by a man, you should probably see what we can do to remove him from the situation. So he throws Joseph in prison. Now, doesn't that feel unfair? If you're in Joseph's shoes, all you've done is right. All you continue to try to do is right. And where has it gotten you? It got you into a pit. It got you sold into slavery. And you think that's about as bad as it can get. You went into a pit. That's about as bad as it can get. No, we're going to make it a little worse. Now you're going to be a slave. And that's as bad as it's going to get, right? No, it's going to get worse. We're going to put you into prison. And prison isn't like the prison that we think of in modern days times. It's very bad conditions. And what has Joseph done to deserve that? Nothing. He's done everything right. He honors God through all of this. And it cost him. It cost him everything that he had. He goes from slave to prisoner, from a house to a dungeon. Now, this is important. I don't want anybody to come out of here thinking, if I just follow God, my life here on earth is going to go great. That's not what the Bible teaches. Joseph followed God in this story, and he went to prison for it. I wish that it was true. I sure wish it was true, but sometimes doing the right thing can make your life a bit harder on earth. I need to preface this by saying on earth. It can make it harder, not easier. All right, so let's fast forward a little bit. So Joseph is in prison now, but listen to what the Bible says next. Same chapter, verse 20. How's this looking up here? It looks pretty good, actually, this time. I want you to hear it straight from the text, because if I just summarize it, you're going to miss what's happening here. So chapter 39, picking up in verse 20 through 23, here's what it says. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison in the palace where the king's prisoners were confined. So Joseph was there in prison. Here's where it gets interesting. The Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him. He granted favor with him, the prison warden. The warden put all the prisoners who were in the prison under Joseph's authority, and he was responsible for everything that was done there. The warden did not bother with anything under Joseph's authority because the Lord was with him. And the Lord made everything that he did successful. Did you hear that? Now, I want to come back to something I told you earlier. I was like, hey, pay attention to this, earmark this, write it down. What did I tell you to write down? I told you to write down that the Lord was with him. And here we see again, right in this moment, twice in 4 verses, we see the Lord was with him. The Lord was with him. So I have a question. Where was Joseph when the Lord was with him? Was he in a palace somewhere? Was he just living it up? No. He's in prison, right? The verses before that, he's in a pit. I'm going to give you a little spoiler alert here. Things are going to get better for Joseph, and he is going to end up in a palace. But even in that moment, like in the moment where he's in the palace, I am certain that the Lord was with him. But the Bible doesn't explicitly say in those verses, in his palace verses, that the Lord was with him in the palace chapters. It does explicitly say it in the slave chapters. It does specifically and explicitly say it in the prison chapter. It makes me wonder, is the writer of this book doing that on purpose? Is he creating that distinction on purpose? Kind of feels like he is. And so Joseph is in prison for what amounts to years. Now, I did some studying because it just says for years, but most equate that it is anywhere from 2 to 13 years. So I put the higher number up on here. There's potential that he was in this condition in prison for 13 years. Not a weekend. Nope, not a summer. Years of his life in a cell in a country that isn't his for a crime that he did not commit. And the whole time, the writer of Genesis keeps quietly telling us what? The Lord was with him. The Lord was with him. The Lord was with him. Eventually, Joseph gets a chance to interpret a dream for the king of Egypt, Pharaoh. And he nails it. He gets it right. Exactly what he thought was what he was trying to interpret. He interprets it, and he does it perfectly. So much so that Pharaoh is so impressed that he actually pulls Joseph out of the prison situation that he was in. And all of a sudden, he does that all in the same day. He cleans him up. He puts him in charge of the entire country. He makes him second in command of Egypt. That happened quick. Wait. So you're telling me he went from a pit, and then he went into slavery, and then he went into prison, and things look dire. Things look like they cannot get any better, and now he is second in command of Egypt, like that. From the dungeon to the palace in about an afternoon. That's a pretty wild story. And then things get even more interesting. A famine hits. No food anywhere. And guess who shows up in Egypt looking for food? All of those brothers. Those same brothers that said, get in that curb, show up wanting some food. The ones that threw him in the pit. The ones that left him there without food. The ones that left him there without water. Those same brothers are back. They don't even recognize, because it's been so many years, they don't even recognize his brother. But he recognizes them. And years later, when Joseph finally tells his brother who he is, oh, they're scared. They're terrified. Why? Why would they be scared? They didn't do anything wrong, right? They just, tried to kill him, decided not to, sold him into slavery, and had a bite to eat instead. Nothing wrong there, right? Yeah, no, there's absolute reason why Joseph should be upset. There's absolute reason that he should have a desire to be angry and to want revenge. But here's what he says instead. Picking up in Genesis chapter 50, verses 19, it says this, "But Joseph said to them, 'Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You planned evil against me. God planned it for good, to bring about the present result, the survival of many people.'" He says, you meant it for evil. You meant this situation for evil. God meant it for good. Sometimes that's what happens. We can take evil situations and God is going to spin it back for good. Now, I don't want you to mishear anything that I'm saying here, that if you follow Jesus, your life is going to look like Joseph's ending. Big house, important job, everybody bowing down. How nice would that be, right? That's not the promise, though, that we're given. Some of the most faithful people that I know are not going to end up running Egypt. Some of the most faithful people that I know are going to continue to be in really hard situations, in really hard seasons of life. And the promise of the Bible isn't that God's going to just get them out of that situation and everything's going to be good. The promise is what? The promise is that he's going to be with them. Remember, we're coming back to that word. And God was with them. God's going to be with them in the pit. God's going to be with you in the prisons. God's going to be with you in slavery. And here's the other thing. Joseph did not know the ending of this, of how this all ends, of how this Bible ends. He doesn't know it. We know the ending. We know the ending because we have the Bible. Joseph spent what amounts to around 13 years between the pit and the palace. And for 13 years, he had no idea what tomorrow was going to look like. All he had was today. And all he had was God was with him. And that's what he clung to. That's all any of us have. I need to make that very clear. We might be in a great season of life or a tough season of life, but make no mistake, that can be taken away just like it was from Joseph, like that. What do we do then? We cling to what we know to be true, that God is with us. We're told as much. So today we looked at a wild story from the Bible. And the thing that I want us to see is that the reason that these stories are wild is because God is in them. This is a wild story. To think about the journey that Joseph has over a matter of a few chapters. Joseph's story is wild because God was in it. And every one of these stories points to a bigger story. Every one of these stories in Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers, all of them point to a bigger story. They point to Jesus. Because Jesus is the one who actually walked into an unknown. He left heaven. He left that. He came into our world. He walked into suffering. He walked into betrayal by his own friends, by the people that followed him, that knew who he was. He walked into some of the same situations that Joseph did. He walked into being falsely accused. Doesn't that sound familiar? He walked into a kind of pit that none of us could climb out of. He walked into death itself. He did that. Why? He did that so that God could be with us. In every prison, in every blindfold moment of our lives, God is with us. Now, there's a name for Jesus in the Bible, Emmanuel. It means God with us. You see, because of Jesus, you don't just get God with you like Joseph did. You get God in you. Yeah. We get God in us. And that name is the Holy Spirit. And it's important to know that he's not leaving. He doesn't leave. So here's what I want to leave you with this morning is not only this week, not only this year, but for the rest of your lives, there are going to be moments, there's going to be places, there's going to be rooms that we walk into, there's going to be seasons of life where we feel like that kid that was blindfolded felt in how he looked like in the first round where he was just walking in a complete different direction. He was blindfolded. We're going to feel that way. We're going to feel disoriented at times. We're not going to feel sure which way is forward. There's going to be times where we walk into the unknown. I was having a conversation with Caitlin coming home, and she goes, "Man, do you know I'm 17? I'm like, "Yeah, I don't like it. I don't love it." And what was weird is I looked at her in this moment, and I think she was feeling some of the same things that I was feeling, is that doesn't make me feel great. Wow, she's getting old, and there's going to be a time soonish where she's going to be gone. And not gone, but she's not going to be at home. I can't take care of her anymore. Same feelings I had when she was 16 and she took those keys from me and left. It's like, I don't love that. I'm sending her into the unknown. Now, I kid around with her. I'm like, man, 18 years old, whew, out you go, bud. In reality, that's going to be pretty devastating. But, that is kind of how life is we walk into the unknown. She's walking as a 17-year-old into the unknown. I'm walking through it as a father into the unknown. You guys almost certainly have situations where you are walking into the unknown. If you haven't, you will. And it's going to feel like you're disoriented. There's going to be times where you feel like you don't know which way is forward. Maybe it's because you're going into a new grade. Maybe it's because you're going into a new school or a new phase of life. Maybe you see a friendship that is falling apart. Maybe it's something that nobody else knows about. Okay, so how do we deal with that? I'm talking to myself here a little bit too, if you can't tell. The move in those moments isn't to be brave. The move isn't to be brave. It isn't to have it all figured out. It isn't to fake it till you make it. The move is to keep the Lord close. If we look at this story of Joseph and how he did this, what did he do? He kept the Lord close. He talked to him in the pit. He talked to them. He talks to him. He talks to him And he continues to talk to him. So the lesson for us is talk to him in our hallways. Talk to him when we're lying in our beds tonight. Talk to him today. And here's the thing. He's already there. He's already there. I want to leave you with this. Whether you are in the pit or whether you are in the palace right now, talk to him because he's with you. That's all I have for this morning. I wanted to, again, thank you for allowing me to be here today. If there's anything that we can do for you today, if we can pray for you, we would love to do that. Or maybe if, for whatever reason, there's anything else that you need us to discuss, we have some wonderful elders here that would love to take your prayers up to the Lord. Maybe you haven't been baptized today. This is what we're here to do. And so if you want to take that opportunity, I want to give you and extend that opportunity. Let's please do that as together we stand and sing.